Welcome to my channel, everybody. I'm Luki Gomez, and I'm here talking about my life experiences as a bicultural, bilingual Guatemalan American or Guatemalan slash United States bicultural kind of situation. You know what I mean. Being bilingual. This set of videos that I've been doing, that is exactly what I am talking about, is the let me put this a little bit closer. That is exactly what I'm talking about, is that influence of coming from these two cultures and how that's influenced my life. And I'm very happy about it. I feel really wonderful. I have been talking about the beginning, how it all started, and if you want to, get an idea of that, you can go and look at some of the earlier videos that I made. So in this video, I want to talk about what happened after Blessed Sacrament Catholic School. I went to a private school in Houston, Texas. It was called Blessed Sacrament Catholic School. And then after that, I went to high school in Houston. And there really isn't, anything unique about that experience. We were just going through the motions of school. I eventually dropped out and got my GED with my father's permission. I told him, look, I'm just like, I'm not doing anything. I'm bored. I'm not feeling it, I really wasn't feeling it. It was a huge high school. And I was just another student that the teachers had already so many students, having been a teacher in high school. My goodness. Every hour you get a new set of students, and some of the classes are 30 students. Multiply that by 6, you have 150 or more, a day. So anyway, in high school, I was just, I had my friends, my brother was there, but there really wasn't much that was captivating me, to say it that way. So I told my dad about it, and he says, well, you can take the GED, I'll take you. So the University of Houston was doing GED exams. So I made an appointment and we went. My dad took me, sorry about that. And I took the GED and I passed it, because when I was at Blessed Sacrament, the teachers were so good there that I passed the GED. It was very easy for me. And even though high school was just like, really didn't do anything there. No learning, really. It's a good thing that I liked reading, but in reality, high school was just hanging out and skipping school, and, that was about it. So, and it was just too big, and just way too many students, What more can you expect, right? And both of my parents were working. So I went and got the GED, I passed it, and I immediately got a job, because what I did learn in high school, actually, I'll take it back. I did do a secretarial practices program. They kind of encouraged me to do that program, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And it's a good thing that I did do that program, because I had those skills, being an office worker, a secretary, and I immediately got a job. Excuse me, at Gulf Coast Community College. And it was a trade school. Of course, I wasn't teaching. I was working the front desk. And that was my first job. And basically, it was fine, I worked. It was interesting. My boss was a really nice lady. She was an older woman. I think I must have worked there for about 6 or 8 months. I didn't work there very long. But it was a good first job. I was making my own money. It was in downtown Houston. So that was kind of cool. I became really familiar with some of the old sections of downtown Houston because during break I would walk around and that kind of thing. I ended up in some neighborhoods that I didn't know existed. And it was very interesting. I remember I walked into this one neighborhood and it turned out to be a black neighborhood. You know, all the people living there were all African Americans. And I walked in there and then I went to the store and it was full of black folks and I got something to drink. And then I was just walking around and it was so pretty because it was very pretty because there was hardly any traffic there at all. And there were a lot of trees, those big oak trees that grow in Houston. And I remember feeling, which was the first time in my life really that I had felt this. I felt like this energy coming up from the earth, from the ground. And instinctively, I kind of knew that this was old earth. This was, you know, a very powerful area. Something powerful happened there, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it had like some interesting history in the olden days. I don't know, but that's what I felt, you know. And so people were, nobody said anything, you know. They just saw this Latino woman walking down the street and they probably wondered, what is she doing here? But nobody really, you know, said anything. I went to the store, their local store, and I got myself something to drink. And then I went back out and then I saw that there was a bus stop. So I waited for the bus and I took the bus back into town. And that's, you know, that was it. So that happened. Okay, another thing that happened in those years that I think that kind of stays in my mind. When I turned 15, my dad came up to me and he said, hey, he used to manage this gas station out on Bel Air, which is a street in Houston. And across the street, there used to be a First Ladies Club. And the First Ladies Club was kind of like a gym, what they used to do back in the 60s, which was you would just go and sit on machines and machines would just rub your muscles around. And that was the health club, right? So he said, you know, what do you want for your 15th birthday? Because turning 15 in Latino cultures is a big deal, right? But I didn't want to have like a dance and a going out party. You know, that was just too much. So he said, do you want a party like that? Or do you want a 1 year's membership to First Lady Spa? And I was like, well, I'll take the 1 year membership at First Lady Spa, Dad. Thanks. And that's what he gave me for my 15th birthday. And it couldn't have been a better gift because what I learned at that place influenced me for the rest of my life. There was, and we're talking about 1968, let's see, 63, 64, 65, 66. Yeah, I turned 15 in 1968. Just when I was doing my last year at Blessed Sacrament Catholic school. So like, I went there and I was doing the machines when suddenly somebody said, we're having yoga classes if you want to come and join. I had never heard of yoga. It's like, yoga classes, really? What is that? And one of the women that was there, she said, well, it's like a relaxation stretching exercises. So I said, well, that sounds good. So I went. And so the young woman who was teaching yoga was very, very good. And I ended up taking yoga with her. She became my guru, my yoga guru. And she was very good. And I felt things in my body that I had never felt before because I was stretching muscles and doing postures, because yoga is all about postures and breathing, right? And I was like, wow. And I loved it. I loved how it put me in touch with my body, which when you do that, and you become more present to whom you are, I think, you know. So that was really wonderful. And I was very lucky to have come across that, you know. And then when I went on one of my trips to Guatemala, it turns out that I had a cousin who was a yogi, and she would wear her saris and stuff. And like I remember for a while I was teaching English at one of the schools, and it turned out that she was teaching there, and that's how we kind of hooked up. Oh my goodness, how's it going, Elizabeth? You know, we were so happy. We started hanging out a lot together, and she taught me how to meditate. And we used to do meditation sessions. So it was that period, excuse me, of my life that these things happened. Another thing that happened that was very, and I'm talking about things that were spiritual, that were part of my spiritual growth. Because even though I went to a Catholic school, I would go to Mass and I just didn't feel anything, you know? I mean, it's like it didn't mean anything. You know, I needed it to be more, I was looking for something that was more real to me. And so when I came across these kind of things like yoga and meditation, that was real for me. And then another experience that I had, which was incredible, was doing hallucinogenic drugs. And it's, you know, I had read the books of Carlos Castaneda, Journey to Ixtlan. They were very popular in the 70s, and I read them. I was a bookworm. Remember, I was reading a lot of stuff. So I came across his books. He wrote a bunch of books. I think I read the first two. Don Juan, his journey, no sé qué, and Journey to Ixtlan. You know, I remember there were a couple of books, and they talked about the Yaqui Indians of northern Mexico. And the story was about this one particular Yaqui Indian. This reporter travels down there, and this Yaqui Indian ends up teaching this reporter his ways of spirituality in his Yaqui culture, right? And so it turns out that a few years later, I was in that part of the world. I was in northern Mexico in a town called Real 14, which is close to Monterrey. And it's in the middle of the desert, and it used to be an old Spanish mining town. To get to the town was built at the top of these mountains that were in the middle of the desert. There was Real 14, which is at the top. And to get to that town, you had to go into the mountain and drive up the mountain in your car up in this tunnel that the Spaniards had built. And then you eventually reach the top. That experience of reaching the top and seeing the desert and the infinity of the desert around me was very impactful. Really, really impactful. I had no idea that the desert had such power. And it's when I started to realize the power of nature, you know, that there's like you can open your spirituality through nature. And I think I became a nature person. That nature became my religion. Communicating with nature, observing the trees, being out in the fresh air and in the sunshine and being around nature became like a very, very important for me. And that was like my spiritual growth that I was having in those years. And I think it was because I was really opening up. And so anyway, while I was in that part of Mexico, I knew about peyote, which is a cactus, a desert cactus that grows in that area. And it has like, before it flowers, it has like these, if you look at the top of it, of this flower, of this cactus, it has like these buttons. And that is the meaty part of that cactus that you can eat. And it'll give you like hallucinogenic journeys, you know. And but the thing is that they tell you in that, you know, it was easy to find in that area. I found some because I asked for it, and I was given it. It came my way. And I tried to bite it so I could eat it, but the taste of it was so bitter and so, you know, you wanted to bite it, but like my mouth would reject it because it was so bitter. That's the nature of this cactus, right? And so I listened to my instinct, and I just said, well, you know, you don't have to eat it now. Just don't eat it. You know, your body's rejecting it, so don't eat it. And plus, if I was going to do it, I should do it there under guidance. And I used to think, after that journey, I thought, one of these years I'm going to return and do a spiritual journey with the peyote, with the guidance of a spiritual guide, you know, of that region. That was kind of like what I had been thinking. But of course, I never got around to doing that. But that was okay. But the thing is that I took the buttons that I had, and I made a little pouch, and I hung it on my neck, and I wore it for a whole year, the whole time that I was in Guatemala at that time. Now, that came much later, but that was another, just in terms of like my spiritual development, you know, these were things that happened to me that were really, really important. Another thing that happened to me that was a few years after that, I realized that if I smoked pot, I didn't smoke pot all the time. I was not a pot smoker party person, you know, because I realized that whenever I smoked pot, marijuana, in large groups or in a social setting, I would get really paranoid. And so I didn't like the way that feels. But I noticed that when I would do it by myself at home, it would calm me down. Amazing. And then it would put me in that state of contemplation, I guess you can say, you know, where I started noticing things that in my normal self, I didn't notice them. You know, they were just like everyday things. And what the effects of marijuana did for me was it kind of calmed me down, and it gave me that ability, I guess, to notice my surroundings at a much deeper level. And I really liked that because it was very reflexive, very reflective. And it was almost like it was teaching me something, you know? It was showing me something that I needed to learn. And since I love learning and exploring, I was game. So then that's when I realized that if I was going to smoke marijuana, to have its full effect, I was not going to smoke it every day. It was going to be a thing that I did for spiritual purpose only. And that's what I would do when I was in that space where I could be comfortable and open up to my spiritual communication with the marijuana. I would smoke it, and then I would take these spiritual journeys, you know, like I would see these visions. Like I remember one time I saw a vision, you know, I would smoke some pot, then I would get high, and then I would just hang out with myself. And then I would, you know, let my mind go. And then I would get these visions. And I remember I got this vision once where there were just like a mass of people in front of me. Like it's just like a huge, like 3 football fields, you know, 4 football fields, 10 football fields of people. Just a bunch of people. And out of that huge amount of people, 2 or 3 souls or spiritual essence rose from 2 or 3 of those people. They rose. And that's the vision that I saw. And the message that I got was that the spiritual lords, like, for example, like Jesus, Buddha, all these spiritual leaders that we've had, what it was saying was that this happens to a chosen few out of all the populace. Only a chosen few get raised up to the higher spiritual levels. That was one vision that I had, which was like really incredible. Another vision that I had, and when I would tell this story, my friends and my family would laugh at me and they would say, "Lucy, were you getting high? Did you have some pot?" And I was like, not this time. I was walking down the street in Guatemala. It was the street that goes from Central Park to the market. So always this street is full of people. There's people walking, there's traffic, because it's the main street that takes you to the area where the market is. And everybody is going to the market. And it must have been like around 2:00 in the afternoon or something like that, And so I was walking down the street. And then I did notice that ahead of me, there was nobody. And behind me, there was nobody either. Across the street, there was nobody. And I thought, well, this is weird. There's nobody around. That's very strange. And I kept walking. And right at that moment, as I was walking down, I see this dragonfly fly right next to me really fast. But it was a dragonfly. It must have been about this big. And on top of the dragonfly was this little green man riding the dragonfly. And he had this pink hat. And he was going, woohoo, woohoo. But it happened so quickly. It happened so quickly that I was like, man, what's going on? That's impossible. But I did see it. And then I looked again behind me to see if maybe somebody had seen it, or ahead of me, or across the street. Nobody was around. I was the only one that saw this vision, or whatever. So that happened. And just stuff like that along the way, Like, I remember also when I was living in Mendocino, and I had some pot, and I love building fires. So I had a wood-burning stove. It was a German stove in the place where I was living. And Mendocino is a very wet area of Northern California. So I was sitting in front of the wood-burning stove, and I had started a fire, and I smoked a little bit of pot. It doesn't take much for me to, get the sense of the marijuana. And so I just sat there looking at the fire. And I had a cat. And while I was looking at the fire, I saw my whole life pass in front of me. From the present all the way to the past, into my mother being born, into my mother's womb. And when I was in her womb, I felt this amazing, incredible love for her. A love that I had never really felt before. This love, it was just like, I don't know how to describe it. And then suddenly, boom, I was this young girl, and I could see the pyramids off in the distance. And I looked at my skin, and I was this skinny brown girl. I must have been like 12. And I was in this market. And I could hear all the sounds of the market, the people talking, the movement, the sounds of movement. It was full of people. And I had this basket on my head, and it was a basket that was maybe about this deep. One of those, and it was a basket. And I don't know what I had on there, but it must have been something up there. And I remember I was very aware that I was inside this girl's body, or I was this girl. And it was really awesome. One of the things that I noticed was that the air felt new. Okay, so how can air feel new? Because maybe the earth was newer than from where I was coming from, right? I don't know, but that's what I felt. And the sounds around me, and I loved it. And I just like, oh man, I want to stay here. Everything felt so crisp and fresh and new. Everything, I'm talking about life, the essence of life, the air. But that's what I was thinking when suddenly, boom, I found myself in these dark woods. And it was very dark. And in front of me, off in the distance, there was this warrior. And he was looking into a fire. But all I could see from my point of view was his profile. I was looking over there and I could see his profile, and he's looking at the fire. So the light of the fire lit his profile face a little bit so I could see the profile. And the first thing that I thought was, this is a warrior who's lost his whole village. He fought trying to defend his village, and he lost everything. Everybody was killed. He was the only one that survived, and he was now that night sitting in front of the fire after this incredible battle, right? And I also thought, well, I used to read a lot, so I knew a few things about history, and I knew that the Romans had invaded the British Isles, and so that's the first thing I thought of, that he was somebody that he was from a tribe that lived in the British Isles, and that, there were, in those days people were invading each other all the time, and so his village got invaded and he lost everybody, but he was a warrior. And then suddenly my cat jumped on my lap, and I came back to Mendocino, in front of the wood burning stove, and my cat was just looking up at me, So that happened, and that was, these are like, they might seem strange to you, and they are kind of strange. I mean, what does it mean? Is it all in my head? I mean, who knows? Life is so mysterious. Life is a mystery sometimes. And all I know is that I was open to the possibilities, and maybe that's why these things happen. That's why I got these visions, or maybe I just have an active imagination, which I don't really think I do, but it happened, and not that I believe in reincarnation. I mean, I don't know. I don't believe in anything, really. I believe in nature, in the power of nature, and how she or he, nature, the earth gives us life, and also the sun. And, in ancient times, a lot of communities would worship the sun. The Egyptians worshiped the sun. The sun was a god. And actually, yeah, anyway, I'm not going to go into any more details about that. So anyway, my interest in these kind of things eventually led me to learn how to read the tarot cards, or the tarot. I always pronounce them differently. The tarot cards, I learned about the symbology behind them, because I like to study, and I like to read, and I like to learn, and I'm curious. And so these things were in my path, and I took that path, and it really, helped me out in my life. So these were like the spiritual things that have happened in my life throughout. So when I go back to the Catholic Church, and coming from Guatemala, Antigua, if you've been in Antigua, you know that every other block has a church, because the Spaniards, they were building churches all over the place. They were very, very religious and Catholic. So I had ample opportunities to go into church and go to a mass and listen to the sermon, and it just didn't mean anything to me anymore, really. But I do like going into these old churches. And one of the things that I really love is the ritual of the candles. When you walk into a Catholic church in Latin America, they're usually these old churches. The older they are, the better for me. These churches are like, 500 years old. They've been standing there for a long time. So usually when you walk into them, you will find places where they have like the statue of a saint or Jesus or Mary and Joseph. And they have a place where you can light a candle. And so you light a candle asking that deity to protect the people that you're lighting the candle for. So let's say that you want the deity to protect your, let's say Saint Joseph, right? To protect your father, you light a candle for your father, asking Saint Joseph to please, watch over your father or watch over your son, or you go where Mary is, or Mary Magdalene, or, any of these other, religious folks from the Catholic tradition, and light a candle. Please bless my mom, or whatever, or watch over me, things like that. And I've always really loved doing that. And every time I'm in a place where there's old churches, I go into those churches, not because I'm going to go listen to mass or hear a sermon. I go in there on a very personal level to light candles for people that I love, asking whoever may be there at that point in time, So that's kind of like my spiritual, journey. It's a spiritual journey that I have created for myself that works for me. And that's exactly how I feel about religion, or your spiritual growth. I mean, because I don't really belong to any religion, I guess, any established religion. What I have done is taking a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that over there, and I've been open-minded enough to apply all these different things, including marijuana, which became a spiritual herb for me. So I guess it's just a matter of intent. So those kind of things in terms of my spirituality happened to me in my young adult life. Now I'm 72. Those things are with me. And right now, at this age, it always goes back to nature for me. The beauty of the world outside my window, outside my door, where the trees live and the air is fresh. I live close to the sea. I'm very lucky. Very lucky. I get to smell fresh sea air. And when the wind blows, it's coming fresh from the sea. And I love that. I'm very lucky that I'm here. It wasn't something that I planned. It wasn't something that I said, oh, when I get old, I'm going to live by the sea. No, I didn't do that at all. What I used to say back in the day when I was young and foolish, I used to say, oh yeah, when I get old, because I was trying to be cool. When I get old, I'm going to spend my time on a rocking chair getting high. That's what I would say, which was silly because eventually I realized that that's not what it was about. Just sitting in the, and getting high. I mean, I'm glad I realized that early back then. That it's just silly. It was silly, and I knew that. But the thing is, it's to me, that's the important thing now. Is nature. And the beauty of the passing of time and the passing of the seasons, the circles of life, it repeats itself. Also, the consistency of the moon. The consistency of the moon gives me stability and comfort. I don't get comfort and stability from being married to somebody or depending on another human being. That doesn't mean that there won't be a day where I will find that support. But for me, what gives me stability is seeing the moon so faithful, always returning, always reflecting the light of the sun and lighting the dark nights when we have to walk the paths at night. It lights the paths for us at night. The moon, the light of the moon. It's very beautiful thing. It's a very beautiful thing and very powerful. Another thing that I like is how the earth and the moon, they're kind of like destined to be together. The earth is big and the moon's little, and sure, the gravity pulls the moon towards it, but they're destined to be together. The moon is happy to be traveling through space with the earth next to it together, and the earth is happy to have the moon there too, and they travel together. I love that idea that these two huge objects that float in space can have that meaning for me, because it's all about meaning and what meaning we bring to it, or like another thing that I really love is trees. To find a park that has a row of trees of the same species. Let's say they're eucalyptus, and you can sit under those trees and just lay back and watch their leaves blow in the wind, and they're kind of like talking to you. They're talking. You just have to open up to that idea. And if you don't hear anything in as terms of messages, just the beauty of them, the fact that they're there, and that you can sit underneath them and look up, and they're so beautiful, and they're so strong and stoic. Permanence of nature is incredible. I love that. And finally, the element of water, my favorite type of water is creek water that runs through creeks and rivers. There's something about the water in a river that's transformative, that's purifying. When you get into a river, I had the chance to get into a river many, many times when I would go up in the mountains in Guatemala, and there was a river in this cabin where we would stay. And I would go to this river and bathe and do my laundry, and without using soap, and get water to boil for tea. I would boil my water from the river. And in those days, the rivers were still pretty clean that you could do that. And this was back in the 80s, I believe. But the river and how it felt to soak your body in a river and to then get out and soak in the sun, the power, the effects on the body, it completely invigorates your body. It did me. So I really honor that power of water, and any kind of body of water, but especially if it's moving water is the best. I think that water that's stagnant, like some lakes, if they're really, really big and deep, the water is really great because they're getting a lot of fresh water from the rivers that come and deposit fresh water into the lake. But if it's like a lagoon, it's kind of stagnant and it's not that big, that water, well, it's not, I don't think it has as much purification value, health value as waters that are deep, deep and fresh, or seawater too. Obviously the ocean is amazing. So that's kind of been my spiritual journey. Now the fact that I was traveling back and forth, that really had nothing to do with my spiritual growth. What affected my spiritual growth was just reading and being open to, because when I read, for example, Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda and the peyote, I had read about it. And I was here in the States when I read about it, So the thing is, this kind of goes a little bit beyond. Being bilingual and bicultural helped me travel to some places and be in situations outside of the U.S. In other words, these things happened in both, didn't matter where I was living or where I found myself. And that kind of makes sense because it's not really about that anymore. It's about what you're inside of you, in your own self, what it is you are developing, pretty much. So, yeah. The weather here has been really crazy in Santa Cruz, Central California. We've been getting a lot of cold rain, and it's been cold. It was like 42 degrees this morning, and that's rare. So it was really cool because it's not a chance to dress up warm. It's kind of fun. But anyway, guys, so that's, I think I'm going to leave it like that. I wanted to talk, another thing that I wanted to talk about, maybe I should just go ahead and do it now, was what happened, okay? Aside from my spiritual growth, there was other stuff going on. Well, as a young person, almost 18, you grow up learning that there are expectations for you in your life, your young life. People want you to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. If you're a guy, we didn't talk about gays in those days. I mean, we didn't even know it existed. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I did later, eventually. But there were expectations of what to do in terms of relationships, get married, have a family. And so it was very easy to fall into that mode. Very easy because it was just like expected. So you didn't even have to think about it twice. It just happened and you allowed it and you didn't question it. Right? And so with me, that's, I started meeting guys that, that fell in love with me, that wanted to marry me, and I was like 17 the first time. And it was like, I like this guy. He was nice.
But he was living in Florida. I wasn't sure if I wanted to live in Florida. So I gave that relationship a chance. But along the way, I took a trip to Guatemala. And in Guatemala, I met this other guy. And he wanted to hang out with me. And so I was like, well, I'm engaged. I was engaged, right? And he goes, oh, you won't be engaged after you hang out with me for a while. So that was crazy as that, right? But the thing is that I was cruel, because when I left, he said, don't send me a Dear John letter, please. And I was like, a Dear John letter? What is that? I didn't know what that was. He goes, a Dear John letter is if you send me a letter saying that you're breaking up with me. Please don't send me one. Well, I ended up sending him one. Okay. And at that time, he had joined the Marines, I think. And he was stationed in Alaska, of all places. So his sergeant over there, my mom talked to him a couple of times, and he said that my fiance was miserable because I had broken up with him. And he was begging my mom to convince me to go back with him. Meanwhile, I'm in Guatemala with this new boyfriend, exploring that experience. And this new boyfriend that I had, and he was Guatemalan. The first guy, he was from Florida. This guy was from Guatemala, and really nice guy too. But he also wanted to marry me. I was like, I just barely know you. It's like now I really think that guys just. I guess women do too, but there's like this attachment, this like codependency, maybe. I don't know, this desire to be with one woman thing. I don't know. But anyway, and he fell in love with me, and and then it came time for me to come back to the States. So I left him. And he was like, please, he gave me his mother's ring as kind of like an engagement ring. So I came back to the States with his ring. And then I met this other guy. And this guy was from Colombia. And I started going out with him. And then I was like, well, I don't really, obviously, this guy that in Guatemala wasn't really the person for me, since I was like, not having any problems, just moving on with my life. If I'd have really been, in love with him, I guess, or care for him, maybe it would have been different. But then another difficult thing about it was that it's not that I was always living in Guatemala or always living in the States. I kept coming back and forth during those periods. So there's a saying in Spanish that says, amor de lejos es para pendejos. Now, I know you know what pendejos means. Idiots, right? So, amor de lejos, love at a distance, is for idiots. Basically, that's what the saying says. Now, it just depends, but really, it's kind of hard to maintain a relationship when you're not together anymore, especially when you're young. So even though I felt guilty about my first boyfriend that was from Florida, and then my second boyfriend that was from Guatemala, even though I felt guilty, and for a while there I felt like, man, Luki, you're so mean. But I forgive myself. I'm not going to blame myself for it because I was young. I was too young to make any commitment with anybody. I had to live my life and figure stuff out, you know? And so my destiny was not with either one of these guys, even though they were nice guys, you know? And many years later, I would find myself alone and I would think, wow, I wonder how my life would have turned out if I would have stayed with, you know, the guy from Guatemala or the guy from Florida, you know? I mean, there would have been a lot of stability with the guy from Florida for sure. The guy from Guatemala, I'm not too sure. I mean, he was having a hard time getting work and stuff, you know? So I'm not really sure if that would have, you know, worked out. With life, you just never know how things are going to work out. You know, you just don't know. And so you just have to do the best you can with what you got. And don't, from experience, don't beat yourself down about it, you know, if you make a mistake. It wasn't intentional. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. But at the same time, I couldn't give them what they wanted. It was too much. And that's okay. You know, and then their pain, they have to deal with it. And I think for both of them, it was really hard. It's not easy when somebody breaks up with you. I know that. It's very painful. But at the same time, what was I supposed to do, right? I mean, first I was too young to really decide anything. And my mom basically became the messenger, but she never said, Lukey, you should do this or you should do that. She never said anything like that. Not at that point in time. But, you know, she was like, oh, Lukey, she went to Guatemala. She goes, Roberto came to see me, my boyfriend from Guatemala that I had, and he wants his ring back. So I was like, okay, sure, of course. And on numerous trips, when I went back to Guatemala, I would run into him, and he was really pissed off at me. He was very upset with me, very angry. I mean, really angry. You know, what was I supposed to do? There's not much I could do. I mean, you know, I had to do what I had to do, live my life in what was happening at that point in time. And there was not much that I could do. So, you know, those experiences with relationships that we have at the beginning of our lives as young adults are important, and they're crucial, and they determine a lot about our lives, you know, and what happens, whether if you end up married with somebody and you stay married for years and you have 6 children, or you end up get divorced and you end up by yourself, or, you know, there's like a lot of things that can happen, and you might plan this is going to happen and that, you know, but in the end, you know, who knows, right? So so there was that juggling, and, you know, for me, it was just, I just kept doing my own thing, being me and doing me, you know, and even if it meant being by myself, it was okay. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it up to here because it's been, I don't know how long I've been talking. Let's see, almost an hour. Okay. Hey, thank you so much for visiting. It might be boring for a lot of people. I'm not getting a lot of views on these, but that's okay, because this is part of my story, and I'm putting it on tape, and it's there, you know, there it is. That's me talking, me being me. All right, you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much for visiting, and see you next time. Bye.